Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, March 5th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about what we can learn from megafauna extinction, successful succession planting, and tips for buying good compost. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Wednesday, everyone. We are halfway through yet another week. They just keep coming. Yesterday, I finally finished that tractor maintenance I've referred to half a thousand times. The pinched nerve in my back was not the most helpful, but that was the easiest thing I could find to do on my body yesterday. So that's what we did, and it's done. And I only spilled oil all over myself a couple times. So I would rank that pretty high on my list of early 2025 spring success stories. It's not a very long list yet, so we'll see how that shakes out. Obligatory shout out to Joel from Earth Tools as well. If you own a BCS tractor, then you know Joel, but he is kind of the most underrated YouTuber of all time. Am I right about that? Just watch one of his maintenance videos, which I had to watch several of them yesterday. They were gold.
Greetings, Earthlings.
Also, I want to shout out our Canadian and Mexican friends who were writing us completely bewildered yesterday after the tariffs went into effect. I've already discussed tariffs a few times over the last few weeks, so I'm not going to do that here, but I assure you that many, if not most of us, are equally as baffled. And now, who knows, the tariffs may already be rescinded by the time this airs. So sending our love and hoping for a rapid resolution to this bizarre, frankly, unnecessary mess. Anyway, as one does, I want to talk about what Megafauna can tell us about how to manage farms and gardens. Seems like a good transition. I recently went down a giant rabbit hole involving Megafauna, the giant creatures that inhabited North America and elsewhere until around 12,000 years ago or so. These consisted of various types of giant beavers, giant sloths, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, many kinds of wolves, several camels, camelids, loads of stuff. I started thinking about this because of the episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast where Mimi Castile interviewed Peter Allen of Mastodon Valley Farm, which I've talked about before, and I will link it in the show notes per usual. And he talked about the impact of those animals on the landscape, rotating through the land and basically creating a really long, healthy savanna until they were gone. So I spent a weekend geeking out about just their lives and what happened. Now, what ultimately happened to these megafauna is one of the most hotly debated topics in paleontology. The exact reasons for why they disappeared so quickly are not 100% agreed upon, but it's generally considered to have been some combination of the climate changing at the time and human hunting and human-caused fires, and also in the case of some birds, potentially the introduction of certain cat species. Some researchers have also posited a theory that disease ravaged several different species, not unlike bird flu, which we are seeing in everything from cats to cows to foxes and raccoons, so that's not impossible, though this disease theory is less accepted. The climate change was called the Younger Dryas, which is technically named after a flower but sounds more like how someone would refer to their neighbor in a rural community. But basically, a bunch of ice melted and poured into the ocean, and global temperatures dropped significantly for a period of time, causing massive ecological global disruptions to the food supply of these megafauna. So whatever the reason or reasons, in short order, large populations of these incredible, massive animals went extinct. The megafauna were largely gone, but nature rebounded or carried on. Now, I am thinking and talking about this not to say one thing, the megafauna, the presence of humans, or the two together was better, but rather to point out that nature adapted to either of them, and for a very long time, both of them together, and flourished. To me, this is a great illustration of that. There is no one right way to grow food and exist on this planet in a way that enriches it. The megafauna moved about, grazing in herds, keeping their impact largely to short stints. The indigenous Americans lived with the megafauna, then later replicated the megafauna with fires that kept the savannas open, moved the buffalo, and etc. They employed agriculture, fishing, hunting, all sorts of food and gathering and growing methods that generally made the land beneath them healthier. I think there are lessons to learn there about impact, about large herbivores in rotation. Obviously, that's where we get like rotational grazing, about fire as an ecological tool, about abundance and diversity. But also with those lessons is potentially the roadmap to recovering this planet. Or at least in part, in a way that isn't the same, but isn't entirely different either. A new way, perhaps, but not necessarily a novel one. It, of course, has to be that way. Cities aren't going anywhere, private land ownership neither. But I'm not saying anything here that others haven't talked about. I'm just fixated on that idea of how many ways good soil and ecological management can be achieved. I found it, helpful or hopeful in some way. Anyway, that's kind of where my brain is at on this Wednesday. What say you? How does this sort of type of history make you think about food, about farming, about, North America, or just the fact that there could have been like a 9-foot tall ground sloth hanging out literally where I'm sitting right now several thousand years ago and just kind of munching on some tree leaves? I'm sure our paleontologist and or archaeologist friends can add some good insight here too. Anyway, think on that. And when we come back, we'll talk about succession planting/planting naturally. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by So Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTIL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruits, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join the mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTIL for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member IB Taylor 123, who writes, quote, "Thank you for making this program. I always enjoy listening and I appreciate your willingness to dive into such a wide array of topics, from pepper plant nursery specifics to wool mulch or compost teas. One broad idea I have a hard time getting my mind around is crop planting and maybe more specifically succession planting. How does one stagger their planting so that they don't end up with a glut or crops one week and nothing the next? How does one manage their nursery production so they have transplants ready when they need them during the season? From my experience of 2 years working for other farmers, and from what I can find online, it seems that the answer might just be, it depends. It seems to me there are so many factors to consider, like shortening or lengthening daylight hours and wild temperature swings. Parenthetically, they say I also live in 6B Midwest. The end of the episode from 13th December 2024 was helpful as an overview, and I am wondering if you had any more specifics to offer. Would you explain how you go about this for your farm, and is there any solid advice that is applicable across zones? Thank you again." End quote. Okay, so great question. Love it. And well, unfortunately, when it comes to successions and greenhouses or plantings, it does indeed depend. All right, so let's go back to that episode you referenced. That was the episode, which I will link in the show notes, about a simple trick for crop planting. It's not as simple, I guess, as it is straightforward. Basically, you look at what you want to harvest each week and work your way backwards. So for storage crops, that's easy. You look at all the potatoes you wish to have for the entire season and plant the amount that you will get that will give you that yield at the beginning of the season, and then you just harvest it and store it and use it as you need it. But for successions of fresh crops, like say beet bunches, or even a cut and come again product like lettuce, how does that work? Every crop is a little different. So let's just do a few different crops. Okay, so take fresh beets with greens on to start. In the early spring, you can plant roughly 3 weeks worth of beets at a time, meaning you don't need to restart the beets for 3 weeks because they will hold relatively well in the field. As you get closer to the summer, you will have to start the number of beets you need every week because they won't hold as well in the high heat or they will get too big. In the fall, you can plant all of your winter beets because they will hold well in the field. And then when the frosts start to hit pretty hard, you can harvest and store them all. So that's beets. Fresh carrots are similar. Start 3 weeks, like we usually start 3 weeks worth in the early spring or 4. Then 3 weeks later, start another 2 to 3 weeks worth of carrots. I've talked about this before, but we'll plant like all of our short season carrots and at least 1 or 2 beds of longer season carrots. So like our 60-day carrots and our 80-day carrots at the same time. And that kind of spreads out that harvest. Then in the summer, start like 2 weeks worth every other week. Does that make sense? So you're basically planting for 2 weeks every 2 weeks. Then for the fall, when storage carrots come back into play, plant every carrot you will need for the fall bunches and winter storage all at once in the late summer. So like you're not planting those in succession. You're just planting them all at once because the bunches will come out at one time, and then you can just get your storage carrots out whenever you need to or whenever you're ready to do it. So for something like radishes, this is slightly different because they grow so fast. So you'd start maybe 3 weeks worth in the late winter, like right now for us, and then no more than 2 weeks worth at a time through the summer because they will get too big and too pithy, especially those planted in May that will be ready around the summer solstice. I often skip radishes through that period just because the greens get giant and the roots are really small and often kind of pithy. Something like lettuce, I account for 2 cuttings in the early spring and really only account for 1 cutting all summer. Extra cuttings are a bonus. So in the late winter, I start trays every 2 weeks, and then in the summer, I start trays every week. Then in like late summer, I plant a bunch for the winter, but I start enough for the entire winter season because regrowth is really slow in the winter. So although I expect 3 cuttings, that 3rd cutting often doesn't come until March. So you will really have to math that out. Like you can't just expect 1 cutting every other week or something. You really have to expect like bed will take at least a month and a half to regrow in the winter. And then we usually replant the next round in late December if we're trying to have lettuce all winter. Clear as mud, right? The trick is just knowing how much of what you can harvest at what time and how much you can plant at one time without it getting too big. So, or bolting or whatever. So how much is the most you can plant at one time, either by the time of year or by the days to maturity of that crop. Easiest thing to do is just plant how much ever you need of those successive crops every week until you really dial it in. That will give you too much food at first, kind of like you mentioned, but also a lot of incentive to dial it in for your region, like take notes and get the data that you need. Like in a northern climate, summer lettuce may regrow a lot better for you than it does for us, and winter lettuce may be a lot slower for you than it is for us. So those are things that only you can know. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Succession planning is certainly an area where growing experience will do a lot of the work for you. All right, up next, let's buy the compost that we actually want, right? Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnwah is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at harnwah.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. Okay, so commercial compost is a somewhat confounding product for most farmers because, well, not all compost is created equal and not all composters care about the quality and efficacy and, frankly, safety of their compost. Those who do care are increasing in numbers, but not everywhere and not at the rate that we'd like to see because compost operations are painfully expensive and difficult to start. So, as a buyer, how should you shop for compost to know that you're getting what you want and or need? Here's a little guide. First, it's important to know what you're looking for. I go over the 4 types of compost in depth in the Living Soil Handbook, and I've done that same thing here on the YouTube channel, which I will link in the show notes. But there are basically 4 different types of compost. Highly carbonaceous compost that can and should be used strictly as a mulch. That's what I call a mulching compost. Creatively. Then there are composts that are made with specific microbes in mind, a la the methods of Dr. Elaine Ingham, or perhaps those that come through Korean natural farming methods, or even something like vermicompost. Those are what I call inoculating composts, as they are more about the microbiology, and you would go broke if you tried to use them as a mulch. Naturally, they have the nutrients you need, but that microbiology is really the focus. That is, of course, similar to fertilizing compost, which aren't always technically compost, like in the case of maybe like dried chicken manure, but those fertilizing composts tend to contain high amounts of plant available nitrogen and are good primarily for immediate plant growth, but cannot be applied too heavily or will burn plants, cause pollution, and make you go broke, none of which is particularly a great idea. Lastly, you have nutritional composts, which are the best of all these worlds: mature, balanced, complete. I often use raised bed mix as an example, but it doesn't have to be that. It could also really just be really well made, really mature compost that is finished composting, it's sifted, and it's ready to rock. They can be used as a mulch, worked into the soil in the gardens, early life. Now, the fun part is that if you called a composter and asked for one of these types of compost, they would have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. With 4 types of compost, the reason then that I classify them this way and that it's important that you know the difference is so you know what you need and how to ask what that particular composter has. If you need a mulch, you can ask how chunky it is, how much they screen it down, that sort of stuff. If you want a fertilizing compost, you can ask about what the base ingredients are. If it's chicken manure involved, that's a good sign. It will likely have more plant available nitrogen. If you want a microbially driven compost to revitalize the soil life, ask them how they feel about some of those things, like Dr. Elaine Ingham's work, for instance, or just soil microbiology or Korean natural farming. Prod them to see if the composter is a nerd. If not, then you are probably not going to get what you want. Same goes for the nutritional compost. If they do not get nerdy about their compost, they are probably not going to get super nerdy with their compost. Now, not everyone has the choice, but if you can buy from a nerd, support the nerd. Also, contamination has become a major issue with compost. Ask them how they mitigate contamination issues, from persistent herbicides to plastics, etc. Sometimes what you will find is that all you have access to is meh compost. It's like a mulching compost, something that like landscapers use. That doesn't mean you cannot improve it, though. Have them deliver a pile, get it under tarp with some drip tape for moisture, and let it mature. Maybe add some compost tea or extract from a good homemade pile from time to time. And if you don't have access to a good compost locally, perhaps it's worth exploring what your own options are for making your own compost or combining with other local farmers to tag team the compost deficit. Also, if you can get a hold of a sample, fill a tray with the compost and plant some beans in there. If those beans don't germinate, or if they come up looking weird or like spindly, there may be some contamination issues there. So I'll talk more. That's called a bioassay, and I can talk more about those another time. But it's a good way of testing your compost before you put it all over your garden. Anyway, let me know what questions or thoughts you have on any and all of that. Megafauna, compost. We kind of just ran the gamut today, didn't we? I'm going to wrap it up there. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music you hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to just one newbie. Mike King. Okay, so a solo story. So in this story, our protagonist, Mike, is walking down the street in Cape Coral, Florida. And walking down the street, it's late at night, and Mike drops the keys to the car that Mike is renting for some reason. Anyway, Mike is like, I got to figure out like how to get these keys. So Mike climbs. So it's either like walk back to the apartment and deal with it in the morning, or climb down into the storm drain, like through the manhole cover, and see if Mike can find the keys. So what Mike decides to do is, why not? Give it a shot. Let's just try the keys. Let's just try the manhole cover. All else fails, I won't see the keys. I'll just go and deal with it tomorrow. But as Mike, so Mike opens the manhole cover, can see the keys down in the bottom, and decides to climb down. And as Mike gets close to the bottom, looking around, Mike sees nothing but a giant underground forest that is filled with crocodiles and birds Mike has never seen, and all sorts of life. And just before Mike can grab the keys, Mike's using the phone, the flashlight on the phone. So Mike sees a small primate there, and it grabs the keys and runs down into the depths of the sewer system. So that is where our adventure really begins. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Thursday. So long as it keeps coming, we'll keep doing Thursdays. All right. Bye.